Hello, and welcome back to this Visionaire tutorial series, The Scenic Route. Up to this point in our game, we have a fully functioning scene, complete with a walkable area that allows the character to go anywhere within the scene properly. He scales, and he can walk behind a couple of scene objects. In this tutorial, we will add a basic action to a scene object so that the player can interact with it. So let's get started. First, under our scene, I'm going to choose Object Sign. And what I want to do is allow the player character to read what's on the sign. First, to do that, I need to define the area that the player can click on, and that's done by adding an action area. I'll click on the very first button, which talks about creating the object areas, and I'm going to outline on this the area that the player can click on in order to read that sign. Just like the way borders, once you link the final point to the first point, it'll close the border. Okay, that gives me my action area for the player to click on. Next, I want the player to walk to the sign when I click on it. I don't want him to try and read it from way across the room. So we want him to walk up to the sign and then read it. So I want to use the alignment of character to object under the Properties tab. And that will set a spot for the character to walk to and a direction that the player character will face when he performs his action. So I want him to face south so that it looks like he's looking at the sign. And I want him to come to about this point here and stand. So that's around about, I'd say somewhere around, let's see, with these coordinates up here, I'd say around 500 by 640. So let's set it to that. 500 by 640. So we have our action area set. We also have the position that the character is going to walk to and face. Let's test that and see if it works first before we go any further. Okay, we run. Now you notice when I move my cursor over top of the action area, it becomes the active cursor. It turned blue. So if I click on that, then he comes over and stops exactly where we had set him, and he faces the direction. So that's all working. So let's close that. Now let's add our action of him reading the sign. So let's go to the Actions tab, and we'll add an action. The default type of action, or execution type, is execute command on object. And in fact, there are many different types of actions that you can take. And there's two different forms of execution types. There's the execution at destination and immediate execution. Now, most of the time you're probably going to choose from execution at destination because that will allow the character to walk to the object and then perform the action. Otherwise, what will happen with the immediate execution, it will immediately start performing these actions and cut off his ability to walk there. So in this case, I want to execute at destination. Now, this is a shorter list for the execute at destination than the one that you can see for the immediate. There's only a shorter list, and you notice that there is no left click. That's because it's contained under the mouse interface as a command button. So if we use executed command on object, then we can choose our left click that exists in our mouse interface. So when we choose that, that then will allow us to left click on the sign, and then once he walks to that spot, he'll start performing those actions. So let's add an action, and by default here, my action was display text by character. And that's basically your speech function for your character. There are, under action part, there's a drop down that contains many actions and so on. There's just too many to go through in this short tutorial, but in this case we just want display text, which is the very first one, for him to speak what he's going to read on the sign. And what this will do is it will trigger the character's talking animation and display the text over his head. Now, what I'm going to use here is what's contained on the sign, which is today's special is ice cream and cherry pie. Yum. Okay, so now that we've added that, if you had voiceover text messages, you could use here the browse button to go and find that file. I don't have one, so I'm just going to skip that. But of course you see that there's options here to remove that sound file in case you got the wrong one, to play it, and so on. Okay, so let's go test to see if our action works the way that we're hoping. Save and run. Now I move over here and he walks over and he says what was there, and it triggered the talking animation. Okay, so that completes this tutorial on how to add a basic action to a scene object. I would advise you to look at the different actions that are available and try to test them out, see what each one of them does, in order for you to find out how you will be maybe using them to do different things, such as do quests and so on. Later on, we'll go through more complex actions for specific tasks, but by no means will I be able to create a tutorial that covers every action that exists. Okay, well that ends this tutorial. I hope to see you in the next.